My name is Charles Miller, and I'm 73 years old, sitting here in the sterile nursing home room in Atlanta, Georgia, watching my own children celebrate on the parking lot below as they divide up my belongings from the house I can never return to. 3 months ago, I was living independently in the home I built with my own hands 45 years ago. Today, I'm trapped in this facility because my own flesh and blood planted hidden cameras throughout my house, recorded my every move for weeks, and used edited footage to convince a judge that I was mentally incompetent and dangerous to myself. I'd love to know where you're listening from today, so please drop your location in the comments below. And if this story resonates with you, consider subscribing, because what happened to me is happening to elderly people across America every single day, and someone needs to speak up for those who can no longer speak for themselves. Let me start by telling you who I really am, not the confused, helpless old man my children painted me as in court. I'm a retired electrical engineer who worked for Georgia Power for 38 years. I design electrical systems for some of the largest buildings in Atlanta. My mind, despite what my children claim, is still sharp enough to calculate electrical loads, remember complex formulas, and solve problems that would stump people half my age. I raised 3 children after my wife Margaret died of breast cancer 15 years ago. David is 45 and works as a real estate agent. Susan is 42 and teaches high school mathematics. Michael is 39 and runs his own accounting firm. All 3 of them turned out successful, educated, and financially stable, partly because of the sacrifices Margaret and I made to ensure they had good educations and strong foundations. For the past 15 years, I've been living alone in our family home on Peachtree Street, a beautiful 2-story house with 4 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, and a large backyard where Margaret used to grow her prize-winning roses. I maintained the house meticulously, handling all my own repairs, paying my bills on time, managing my investments, and living independently without any assistance from anyone. Sure, I'll admit that age has brought some changes. Sometimes I forget where I put my reading glasses, and occasionally I might leave a light on when I go to bed. Last month, I couldn't remember the name of my neighbor's new dog, and sometimes I have to think for a moment before recalling what day of the week it is. But these are normal signs of aging, not symptoms of dementia or incompetence. The problems with my children started about 2 years ago when David began making comments about the house being too big for me, suggesting that I should consider moving into a retirement community. When I firmly declined, saying I was perfectly capable of maintaining my own home, he began visiting more frequently, always looking around with a critical eye, pointing out things he claimed were safety hazards. Susan joined in the campaign, expressing concerns about my driving, even though I've never had an accident and my vision and reflexes are still excellent. She started suggesting that perhaps it was time to give up my car keys, to let them handle my grocery shopping and medical appointments. When I reminded her that I was still fully capable of taking care of myself, she exchanged meaningful looks with David that made me uncomfortable. Michael, the youngest, took a different approach. He offered to help me with my finances, suggesting that managing investments and paying bills was becoming too stressful for someone my age. When I showed him my perfectly organized filing system and my detailed budget spreadsheets, he seemed almost disappointed that everything was in perfect order. The turning point came last winter, when I had a minor incident that my children would later blow completely out of proportion. I was cooking dinner one evening, making my usual Tuesday night meal of pork chops and mashed potatoes. I had put the chops in the oven and was preparing the potatoes when my neighbor called with news that another neighbor, old Mr. Henderson, had been taken to the hospital with a heart attack. Concerned about Mr. Henderson, I grabbed my coat and walked over to his house to check if his cat needed feeding and to make sure his doors were locked. I spent about 20 minutes taking care of these tasks, and when I returned home, I discovered that I had left the oven on. The pork chops were overcooked but not burned, and there was no damage to anything. It was the kind of minor oversight that could happen to anyone at any age, especially when distracted by a neighbor's emergency. But when David stopped by the next day and I mentioned the incident in passing, his reaction was completely disproportionate. He acted as if I had nearly burned down the house, as if this single moment of distraction proved that I was no longer capable of living safely on my own. He immediately called Susan and Michael, and within an hour, all 3 of them were at my house for what they called a family meeting. During this meeting, my children presented what they called their concerns about my safety and well-being. They cited the oven incident as evidence of declining mental capacity. They pointed to the fact that I sometimes forgot to lock the front door at night, though I argued that in our safe neighborhood, this was hardly a major security risk. They mentioned that my lawn wasn't as perfectly manicured as it used to be, ignoring the fact that I'm 73 years old and perhaps shouldn't be expected to maintain the same physical standards I did in my 50s. When I defended myself and insisted that I was perfectly capable of continuing to live independently, they became more aggressive in their arguments. David suggested that I was in denial about my condition, that people with cognitive decline often lack insight into their own limitations. Susan added that they were worried about me, that as my children, they had a responsibility to ensure my safety even if I didn't appreciate their concern. The conversation became heated when they suggested that I should consider selling the house and moving into an assisted living facility. I told them in no uncertain terms that I had no intention of giving up my independence or leaving the home where I had built a life with their mother. This house represented 45 years of memories, of holidays and birthdays, of watching my children grow up, of caring for Margaret during her illness. I wasn't going to abandon it because of one overcooked pork chop. After that meeting, my children's visits became more frequent, but also more stressful. They would arrive unannounced, claiming they were just checking on me. But I could see them inspecting the house, looking for evidence to support their theory that I was declining. They would ask me repeated questions about whether I had taken my medications, whether I had eaten properly, whether I had any problems or concerns they should know about. I began to feel like I was under constant surveillance, like my every action was being scrutinized and judged. When I mentioned this to David, he assured me that they were just concerned family members who wanted to help. But their help felt more like harassment, and their concern felt more like an invasion of my privacy and autonomy. What I didn't know at the time was that my children had already consulted with an attorney about having me declared mentally incompetent. They had researched the legal process for obtaining guardianship over an elderly parent, and they were building a case based on their observations of my supposed decline. The oven incident had given them what they thought was ammunition, but they needed more evidence to convince a court. That's when they decided to install hidden cameras throughout my house. I discovered the first camera quite by accident. I was dusting the living room mantelpiece, something I do every Thursday as part of my weekly cleaning routine, when I noticed something small and black tucked behind one of Margaret's photographs. At first, I thought it might be some kind of electronic device that had fallen back there, but when I examined it more closely, I realized it was a tiny camera. The shock of finding that camera was indescribable. To realize that my own children had been secretly recording me in my own home, violating my privacy in the most fundamental way, felt like a physical blow. I searched the house and found 5 more cameras hidden in various locations. One in the kitchen disguised as a smoke detector, one in my bedroom behind a picture frame, one in the bathroom hidden in a ventilation grate, one in my study built into what looked like a decorative bookend, and one in the basement workshop concealed in a toolbox. The invasion of privacy was complete and devastating. These cameras have been recording my most private moments, my daily routines, my personal habits, everything I did in what I thought was the safety and privacy of my own home. My children have been watching me shower, sleep, eat, read, work on my hobbies, and go about my daily life as if I were some kind of laboratory specimen. I was furious, hurt, and deeply betrayed. I called David immediately and demanded an explanation. His response was calm and matter-of-fact, as if secretly recording your father was a perfectly reasonable thing to do. He told me that they were concerned about my safety and well-being, that they needed to document my daily activities to ensure I was taking proper care of myself. When I expressed my outrage at this violation of my privacy, David's tone became condescending. He explained that elderly people often don't recognize their own limitations, that they needed objective evidence of my condition to make informed decisions about my care. He assured me that the cameras were for my own good, that they were just trying to protect me from myself. I demanded that they remove the cameras immediately, but David refused. He said that, as my concerned children, they had not only the right, but the responsibility to monitor my safety. When I threatened to call the police, he calmly informed me that they had already consulted with their attorney, and that what they were doing was perfectly legal as long as it was in my best interests. The next few weeks were a nightmare of paranoia and anxiety. Even after I found and disabled all the cameras I could locate, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was still being watched. I found myself second-guessing every action, wondering if my children would somehow use it as evidence against me. I became afraid to cook, afraid to go out, afraid to do anything that might be misinterpreted as a sign of incompetence. The psychological impact of the surveillance was devastating. I had always been a confident, independent person, but now I felt vulnerable and uncertain. I started doubting my own abilities, wondering if perhaps my children were right, if perhaps I really was declining and simply couldn't see it myself. The constant stress of being watched and judged began to affect my sleep, my appetite, and my overall mental health. But the worst was yet to come. 3 weeks after I discovered the cameras, I received a notice that my children had filed a petition with the county court requesting that I be declared mentally incompetent and that they be appointed as my legal guardians. The petition cited numerous incidents of alleged cognitive decline and unsafe behavior, all supposedly documented by their surveillance footage. The court hearing was scheduled for the following month, and I was advised to hire an attorney to represent my interests. I found a lawyer who specialized in elder law, but when I explained my situation, even he seemed skeptical about my chances of maintaining my independence. He warned me that courts tend to err on the side of caution when it comes to elderly individuals, especially when family members express genuine concerns about safety. My children's attorney presented their case with clinical precision. They had edited together footage from their hidden cameras that made me look confused, forgetful, and potentially dangerous. The video showed me searching for my keys for several minutes, forgetting to turn off lights, and yes, the infamous incident of leaving the oven on while helping my neighbor. But what the jury didn't see was the full context of these incidents. They didn't see the hours of footage showing me reading complex engineering journals, balancing my checkbook, maintaining detailed records of my medications, completing crossword puzzles, and managing all aspects of my daily life with complete competence. They only saw the carefully selected moments that supported my children's narrative. The most damaging piece of evidence was a video of me standing in my kitchen one morning, apparently confused about what I was supposed to be doing. What the court didn't know was that I had just woken up from a nap and was still groggy, trying to remember what I had planned to cook for lunch. But edited and presented without context, it looked like evidence of serious cognitive impairment. My attorney tried to present evidence of my competence, including testimony from my doctor, my neighbors, and my financial advisor, all of whom attested to my mental sharpness and independence. But the visual evidence of surveillance footage was compelling, and the judge seemed to be swayed by my children's apparent concern for my welfare. The proceedings were emotionally devastating. To sit in a courtroom and listen to my own children describe me as a confused, incompetent old man who posed a danger to himself was almost unbearable. They spoke about me as if I weren't there, as if I had already lost the capacity to understand or participate in decisions about my own life. David testified about finding me confused in my kitchen, about his concerns for my safety, about his belief that I was no longer capable of living independently. Susan spoke about my supposed memory problems and my alleged difficulty managing my daily affairs. Michael presented financial records that he claimed showed signs of cognitive decline, though any objective observer would have seen them as evidence of careful, methodical financial management. When it was my turn to testify, I tried to present my side of the story, to explain the context of the incident my children had documented, to demonstrate my continued competence and independence. But I could see in the judge's eyes that he had already made up his mind. In his view, 3 successful adult children wouldn't go through the trouble and expense of court proceedings unless they had genuine concerns about their father's welfare. The judge's decision was devastating, but not unexpected. He ruled that while I might not be completely incompetent, the evidence suggested that I could benefit from additional oversight and support. He granted my children limited guardianship over my financial and medical affairs and ordered that I be placed in a supervised living facility for my own safety and well-being. The transition to the nursing home was handled with efficient brutality. Within a week of the court decision, my children had arranged for my placement at Sunset Manor, a facility that they assured me was highly rated and well-regarded. They packed up my personal belongings, put my house on the market, and essentially erased the independent life I had built over 73 years. Sunset Manor is not the worst place in the world, but it's not home. I have a small room with basic furnishings, scheduled meal times, organized activities, and constant supervision. The staff is generally kind and professional, but they treat me like all the other residents, as someone who needs to be managed and protected rather than as an individual with preferences, opinions, and capabilities. The most painful part of this experience has been watching my children profit from their betrayal. David handled the sale of my house and managed to get an excellent price for it. Susan took over management of my financial investments and has been collecting fees for her services. Michael has positioned himself as the primary decision-maker for all my affairs and has moved into a larger house with the money he saved on his own living expenses. They visit me regularly, always maintaining the pretense that everything they did was for my own good. They bring flowers, sit with me in the common area, and update me on family news as if our relationship hadn't been fundamentally altered by their actions. They seem to genuinely believe that they did the right thing, that they saved me from myself, that I'm better off under their care and supervision. But here's what my children didn't count on. My mind is still sharp, my determination is still strong, and my memory of their betrayal is crystal clear. I've been documenting everything that has happened, keeping detailed records of their actions and their motivations. I've been researching the legal options available to someone in my situation, and I've been quietly building a case for my own competence and independence. More importantly, I've been making allies. There are other residents here at Sunset Manor who have been through similar experiences, elderly people who were placed here against their will by family members more interested in their assets than their welfare. We've been sharing stories, comparing notes, and supporting each other in ways that the staff probably doesn't fully appreciate. I've also been working with a new attorney, one who specializes in cases where elderly individuals have been wrongfully declared incompetent. This lawyer has seen cases like mine before and knows how to challenge guardianship arrangements that were obtained through questionable means. She's particularly interested in the illegal surveillance that my children conducted and the way they manipulated the evidence presented to the court. But the most significant development came last month when I received an unexpected visitor. Dr. Patricia Hartwell, a geriatrician and expert in elder abuse, had heard about my case through professional networks and wanted to interview me for a research study she was conducting on financial exploitation of the elderly by family members. Dr. Hartwell spent several hours with me, conducting cognitive assessments, reviewing my medical records, and analyzing the evidence that had been presented in my guardianship hearing. Her conclusions were exactly what I had hoped for. There was no evidence of significant cognitive decline, no indication that I pose a danger to myself, and substantial evidence that I had been the victim of a carefully orchestrated campaign to strip me of my independence and assets. Dr. Hartwell's report, combined with the work of my new attorney, has given me the ammunition I need to challenge my guardianship arrangement. We're preparing to file a motion with the court to have the guardianship dissolved and my independence restored. The illegal surveillance, the manipulation of evidence, and the expert testimony about my competence should be enough to convince a judge that a serious mistake was made. But even more satisfying than the legal vindication has been the personal revelation that I'm not alone in this fight. There are organizations dedicated to protecting the rights of elderly individuals, advocacy groups that work to prevent the kind of abuse I experienced, and legal professionals who understand that age alone is not a reason to strip someone of their fundamental rights. My children thought they could quietly dispose of their inconvenient father, taking control of his assets while congratulating themselves on their concern for his welfare. They thought that the combination of their respectable positions in the community and carefully edited surveillance footage would be enough to convince a court that they were the responsible parties in this situation. What they didn't anticipate was that their father might fight back, that he might have intelligence and determination to expose their scheme, and that there might be people willing to help him reclaim his life and dignity. They underestimated the man they raised, the man who taught them about integrity and justice, the man who spent his career solving complex problems and refused to give up when faced with challenges. The legal process will take time, but I'm confident that justice will eventually prevail. My competence will be established, my guardianship will be dissolved, and I'll be able to return to independent living. I may not be able to get my house back, but I can find another place to live, another home where I can spend my remaining years with dignity and autonomy. More importantly, My story will serve as a warning to other elderly individuals about the dangers of family members who may not have their best interests at heart. It will expose the ease with which the legal system can be manipulated to strip competent adults of their rights, and it will demonstrate the importance of fighting back when faced with injustice. That's my story. How my own children use hidden cameras and lies to steal my independence, but how I refuse to give up the fight to reclaim my life. Sometimes the people who are supposed to protect you are the ones you need protection from. But sometimes, if you're strong enough and determined enough, you can still find a way to win.